The old garage smelled of motor oil and metal, a place where engines hummed, and time seemed to slow down. It wasn't the kind of shop that advertised flashy deals or had a waiting area with free coffee. No, this was the kind of place where people came because they trusted the man who worked there. Sam had been fixing cars in this small town for over 20 years. His hands, rough and stained with grease, told the story of a man who had spent his life helping others, one repair at a time. That evening, as Sam wiped his hands on a rag and prepared to close up, a hesitant figure appeared in the doorway. She wasn't the usual customer, no hurried businessman or weekend traveler. She was a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in clothes that had seen better days. Her face carried the weight of worry, and her fingers clutched the strap of a worn-out purse like it held her last hope. "Excuse me," she said softly, stepping inside. "My car broke down a few blocks from here. I don't know what's wrong, but I really need to get it fixed." Sam studied her for a moment. There was something in her voice, an edge of desperation she was trying to hide. He had seen it before, people too proud to ask for help, but left with no other choice. "Where's the car?" he asked, grabbing his toolbox. Relief flickered across her face. She led him to an old sedan, parked crookedly near the curb. One look under the hood told Sam all he needed to know. The engine was in bad shape, and the repairs wouldn't be cheap. But when he turned to tell her, she spoke first. I don't have the money to pay right now," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I swear I'll come back with whatever I can." Sam could tell she wasn't lying. He had heard all kinds of excuses over the years, but this wasn't one of them. The way she stood, shifting nervously, made it clear that asking was already humiliating enough. For a moment, he considered telling her he couldn't do it. Business had been slow, and he had bills of his own. But then he looked at the car again, the way the tires were worn, the scratches along the side. This wasn't a car of someone who lived comfortably. "Don't worry about it," he said, shutting the hood. "I'll fix it." The woman's eyes widened. "But, no buts," Sam said firmly. "You need your car. I'll take care of it." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "Thank you," she whispered. He waved her off, already pushing the car toward the garage. "Come back in the morning. It'll be ready." The woman left with a look of disbelief, like she couldn't believe kindness like that still existed. And maybe, in a world where everyone seemed to be looking out for themselves, it didn't. But Sam wasn't like that. He fixed cars not just for money, but because he knew what it felt like to need a break. By the time the sun rose the next day, the sedan was running smoother than it had in years. When the woman arrived, she couldn't stop thanking him. "I don't even know how to repay you," she said, gripping his hands. "Just pass it on," Sam said with a small smile. She nodded, promising she would, and with that, she drove off, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and gratitude. Sam didn't think much of it after that. He went back to work, fixing engines and changing tires, just like always. Days passed, then a week, and the moments slowly faded into the back of his mind, until one afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside the shop. It was the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in their small town, the kind that looked like it belonged to a businessman or someone important. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man dressed in an expensive suit. His shoes alone probably cost more than most of the cars Sam worked on. People in the town rarely saw visitors like this, and it didn't take long before curious eyes peeked from shop windows, and passers-by slowed their steps. The man walked straight towards Sam, his expression unreadable. "Are you Sam?" he asked. Sam wiped his hands on his jeans and nodded. "That's me. What can I do for you?" The man studied him for a moment before speaking. "I heard about what you did for someone." Sam frowned, confused. He had helped plenty of people. "You'll have to be more specific." The man smiled slightly. "You fixed a woman's car. For free." Realization dawned on Sam, but he didn't understand why this stranger cared. "Yeah, I did." The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something. When Sam saw what it was, his breath hitched. It was a check, a large one, and the name on it was a name he never expected to see. Sam stared at the check, his fingers frozen in place. The numbers printed on it made his chest tighten. It wasn't just a couple $100. This was life-changing money, the kind that could wipe out debts, upgrade his shop, maybe even give him a break for the first time in years. He looked back at the man, his sharp suit and polished shoes, standing in stark contrast to the grease-stained garage. Sam had no idea who he was, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a random visit. "Why?" Sam finally asked, his voice steady but guarded. The man's expression softened, and he let out a breath. "The woman whose car you fixed. She's my sister." Sam blinked, caught off guard. He thought back to the woman, her worn-out clothes, the way she had clutched her purse, like she was afraid to let go. She never mentioned having a wealthy brother. If anything, she looked like someone who had been struggling alone for a long time. "She didn't tell me much about her family," Sam said carefully. The man nodded. "She wouldn't. She's always been stubborn, too proud to ask for help." His gaze drifted toward the garage, taking in the tools, the half-fixed cars, the place that was more home to Sam than anywhere else. "When she told me what you did, I had to come see for myself." Sam studied him, still unsure what to say. He wasn't the kind of guy who expected rewards for doing the right thing. He fixed her car because she needed it, not because he wanted something in return. "I didn't do it for money," Sam finally said, handing the check back. The man didn't take it. "I know. That's why you deserve it." Sam hesitated. He had spent his whole life scraping by, barely making enough to keep his shop running, and yet, taking this money felt wrong. He didn't want to be paid for kindness. Seeing his hesitation, the man spoke again. "This isn't just about repaying a favor. My sister's been through a lot. She lost everything, her job, her home. She didn't tell me how bad things were until she had no choice. And when she finally did, she told me about you, about how a complete stranger helped her when she had nothing." He exhaled, shaking his head. "People like you, they don't come around often." Sam's grip on the check tightened. He had always believed in helping where he could, but he never thought of himself as someone special. He was just a guy who fixed cars. The man took a step closer. "If you won't take it for yourself, then take it for your shop, for the people in this town who need you." That struck something deep. Sam looked around at the old garage, the tools held together with duct tape, the flickering light in the corner. He thought about the customers who came in, barely able to afford an oil change. He had lost count of how many times he had patched up a car for free, knowing they had rent to pay before they could worry about repairs. Maybe this money wasn't just about him. Maybe it was about something bigger. Sam took a slow breath, then folded the check carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "All right," he said, "but on one condition." The man raised a brow. "And what's that?" "You tell your sister. She's welcome here any time," Sam said. "No charge." The man smiled, nodding. "I think she'd like that." With that, he turned to leave. But before getting into his car, he glanced back. "You may not see it, Sam, but you changed her." Life that day, Sam didn't answer. He just watched as the car pulled away, disappearing down the road. For a long time, he stood there, staring at the empty space where the stranger had been. He had spent years fixing broken engines, but maybe, just maybe, he had done something more. And for the first time in a long while, Sam felt like the world had given something back. The days passed, but Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. He had spent his whole life helping people without expecting anything in return. Yet now, for the first time, it felt like someone had truly seen him. The check still sat in his pocket, untouched. He hadn't decided what to do with it yet. All he knew was that it needed to be used for something bigger than himself. One evening, just as he was about to lock up the shop, he heard the familiar hum of an engine pulling up outside. When he stepped out, he saw the old sedan, the same, one he had fixed for free. And behind the wheel was the woman. She stepped out hesitantly, her eyes scanning the garage as if unsure whether she should be there. But there was something different about her this time. She no longer looked weighed down by worry. There was hope in her eyes, a quiet strength. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Sam admitted, leaning against the doorframe. She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I had to come back." Sam crossed his arms. "Your brother already took care of everything." She shook her head. "I'm not here because of him." She took a deep breath. "I'm here because I wanted to thank you properly." Sam waved a hand. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted gently. "When you helped me that day, you didn't just fix my car. You gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. A reason to believe that good people still exist." She looked down for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "I was at my lowest. I had lost my job, my home, everything. I was ready to give up. And then, out of nowhere, a stranger decided I was worth helping." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "That changed me." Sam didn't know what to say. He had never thought of himself as someone who could change a life. He just did. What felt right. "I started over," she continued. "I got a new job, a small place to stay, and I'm getting back on my feet." She glanced at the garage, then back at him. "But I wouldn't have made it if it weren't for you." Sam felt something tighten in his chest. He had spent his life fixing things, cars, engines, machines. But he had never thought about fixing people. And yet, here she was, standing, in front of him, proof that a little kindness could go a long way. "I wanted to do something in return," she said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. Sam hesitated before taking it. When he opened it, his brows furrowed. It was a business license. "I saved up and got this," she explained. "It's for you." He looked up at her, confused. "I don't understand," she smiled. "I heard from your customers about how you've been running this place on a thin line for years, how you help people, even when you can't afford to. I wanted to make sure you had something solid. So, I took care of the paperwork. Your shop is now officially registered, and I found a local program that offers small business grants. All you have to do is apply, and they'll take care of the rest." Sam blinked, speechless. He had spent years struggling to keep his garage afloat, always putting others first, never thinking anyone would do the same for him. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice quieter than before. She smiled. "Neither did you." For a moment, there was silence. Then, finally, Sam let out a breath and chuckled. "You really didn't take no for an answer, huh?" "Not this time," she admitted. Sam looked at the paper again, then at the garage he had poured his life into. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break he had never asked for, but desperately needed. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying more weight than he expected. She nodded, understanding. "Just pass it on." He smiled at that. "I think I already did." As she got back into her car and drove away, Sam stood there for a long moment, watching until the taillights disappeared down the road. Then, with a deep breath, he looked at the business license in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt like things were finally falling into place, and all it took was one act of kindness to set everything in motion.